Now, the word America. You heard that the word America comes from Amerigo Vespucci, who was an explorer. He served Spain and he also served Portugal. Supposedly, Amerigo Vespucci had conducted 4 major voyages in the New World, or what they called the New World. Supposedly, according to his letters, he had traveled here, he had traveled there, he'd been all kinds of different places, had different kind of experiences and so forth. So compared to other pilots and explorers, he was the most traveled. So he wrote some letters that were published in Northern Europe. At the time, the printing press had just come out slightly before that. A German geographer read about his travels, his explorations, and some of his findings and so forth. And he wrote to the educated business society of Northern Europe and said, look, of all the explorers, this guy is the most traveled. Why don't we name the New World after him? And why don't we give it a female name like we did with Europe and Asia? So they named it America to honor him. 6 or 7 years later, they found out they had a problem. This guy had lied. He did none of those things. So they changed the name. The cartographers or map makers changed the name to Tierra Incognita, or unknown land. However, after 6 or 7 years of saying America, it's kind of hard to break that habit. So they were unable to change the name. However, Spain at no time called this New World or this Western Hemisphere America. They call it Latino. Now, people ask me if I'm Native American, and I say, no, I'm free American. You don't come here and take my land, take my language, destroy my heritage, destroy my self-concept, destroy my language, and then give me some ridiculous title like Native American. Okay? I'm free American. That title, that concept was brought here by Europeans is an insult to do what you did and to give me that title. No, thank you. I'm a free American. Columbus wanted the entire hemisphere named after him. There was a compromise. They named the country Colombia after him. Colombia, Columbus. Today, America, or America, is more of a country than it is a hemisphere. But that's the indication of the attitude, mentality of white America, or people in the United States. This idea of manifest destiny, they can do what they want, they can take what they want. This was the name of a hemisphere, but they took it upon themselves to take that name. It was kind of funny. A few years ago, they had the Tournament of the Americas. Had to do with some kind of athletic event. Listen to that, Tournament of the Americas. And then they had America Fever or America. It's kind of funny. Now, the other word I want to deal with is Indian. And this is a very important word. There's a couple schools of thought as to where it came from. We all know about the idea that Columbus thought he had landed in India. Come on in, thanks for coming. A little late. Okay.
Don't start. You can't go there.
Okay, back to what I was saying is that we all know about the theory that Columbus came here, thought it was in India, and named the people Indians, or Indios, and it became anglicized into Indian. Well, there's another school of thought that actually probably has more credibility, because Columbus had written some letters back to Spain to the King's Queen. And in those letters, he talked about, he said, these people run around half naked, barefooted. There's food all over the place. Nobody goes hungry. There's love and respect. There's no war. They're beautiful people. It's like a paradise. He said, these people son una gente en Dios. These people are a people in the grace of God. So that name stuck. In 1977, the first International Conference of American Indians of the Western Hemisphere was held in Geneva, Switzerland. Now, why you would leave your hemisphere and go to Geneva, Switzerland, I don't know why. But in that conference, which was sponsored by indigenous people, they talked about how do we identify ourselves? What do we call ourselves? And after having debated the names, they decided on keeping the name Indian, because that's the name that was used to enslave us. That's the name we're going to use to free ourselves. And that's also Russell Lee talked about that. He liked the idea of being a people in the grace of God. So I concur with that. We are all Indios. We are the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. However, there's a monopoly going on with the federal government. The federal government has chosen to identify and decide who Indians are. And that's unfortunate. We fall into their trap. We should not allow the government to do that. In addition to that, enrolled Indians have fallen into that trap to where they do not recognize us, and I'm speaking generally, because there are exceptions on both sides of the fence. They do not recognize us as brothers or Indians. And at the same time, many of us do not recognize ourselves as Indians. Indian simply means the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. That's it. That's the commonality that we share. That's the one thing that brings us together. Now, I'm going to attempt to define an enrolled Indian and how it differs from a non-enrolled Indian. And if I get in trouble, if I miss some things, Sarah's going to help me out. Okay. Now, originally, when the Europeans came, they were on this coast, and they started moving westward. And they had this concept of manifest destiny, that they were superior to the indigenous people. God had sent them to take the land and to eliminate the people, believe it or not. Now, in the end, after they had eliminated approximately 98 to 99%, this is in the United States, of the indigenous people, is well documented, at a pace that would embarrass Hitler. The few that were left were placed on reservations. Treaties were signed, and in these treaties, supposedly, the Indians gave land to the invaders in exchange for a written agreement that said they would receive services and commodities until the end of time. Even though they were forced, they were absolutely forced to sign these treaties. Now, in being placed on reservations, a kind of checking system was kept. who was there, who was born there, and so forth. And for the most part, there was not a lot of mobility outside of the reservation. Anytime you left the reservation, you had to notify people in charge. In 1887, this is after the Indian problem was secured. The land was taken, the Indians were placed on the reservation, the white man was safe. No more wars. We got them where we want them. We don't need treaties anymore. But the world was observing. So they had to devise a way to eliminate reservations and to eliminate the Indians or mainstream them so they would eliminate themselves. So they devised a ploy, and they referred to it as the General Allotment Act. In the General Allotment Act, the government said, we will give each and every Indian 160 acres of land if he is half or more Indian blood and can prove it through some kind of documentation. Well, excuse me. Even though Indians came and they had the features and they had the history and so forth, and they had people say, yeah, he grew up on this reservation with us, if he didn't have the document, then they did not qualify. They were removed from the reservation and they were not granted land. Indians do not own land individually. That is a European concept. Land is owned communally. And this is true throughout the Western Hemisphere. So what they were trying to do is give these individuals land, people who could not farm, who knew not how to farm, who had no market for their products, who had no technology, who had no equipment. And not only that, better than 50% of the land was not arable. At the time, 1890, there was approximately 250,000 Indians. And they were in possession of 138 million acres. 48 million of those acres were distributed to so-called documented Indians. Indians that could prove through documents that they were in half or more. That left 86 million acres that were declared as surplus. The government took that, put it on the market, and made it available. And guess who took it? White man. Now, 20 million acres of the 48 million acres that were given, like I said, were not arable. They were arid or semi-arid land. Now, if I give you 160 acres, you live on this reservation. If you don't have a market, you don't have seed, you don't have technology, you don't have equipment, what do you do with it? You sell it. So what they found is that through documentation and deceit, that they could systematically dissolve these reservations and this population. So they were able to get rid of a lot of Indians and to take back a lot of the land systematically and quietly. So they began to realize, why don't we do this in all our federal services? So they came up with this concept of enrolled Indians. So they began to make Indians prove that they were Indians. Now, the Pueblo Indians were not recognized as Indians until 1910. And that's hard to believe. Had it not been for the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, they simply would not have been identified or recognized as Indians. White man says, you guys are too civilized. You're not wild. You're not Indians. This is totally ridiculous. They fought until 1910 to get recognized. The Yaqui Indians, who are from northern Mexico, went into exile from Mexico, fighting the Mexican government. They were Chichimeca Indians, and I'll get into that later. Now, they went into exile, and in 1978, finally, they became enrolled Indians. And they now qualify for all the services that other enrolled Indians receive. So here's the white man playing God, picking who is and who is not Indian. And we need to recognize that. Now we have, and this has always bothered me. I consider myself brown. I consider the Western Hemisphere brown. I remember growing up reading this saying that came out of one of the Xicano papers. and it said, America is not a country, it is a continent. It is a brown continent. But you hear a lot of Indians calling themselves red people and red man. And finally, I was able to discover where that came from. Now, 200 years after this country had been born, the United States, they still hadn't used that word, red man. But in the 1700s, Charles Linnaeus, the naturalist who was going around classifying plants and classifying animals, thought he'd classify races. So he classified 4 races: the yellow man, the black man, the white man, and the red man. So the red man became the color of the Western Hemisphere. And look at us, we're not red, but it symbolizes our color in terms of looking at it from a scientific point of view or Charles Linnaeus' point of view. So that's where the term comes from, and I think that's important to understand. Another term that I find a lot of difficulty with, is the term Latino. And I know a lot of the gangs, I watch them on TV, movies. I talk to some of the guys when I go to California, Arizona. They are so proud, they are so proud of themselves because they do not call themselves Latino. Hispanic. And we're Latino. They don't know the history. Latino simply means speaker of Latino. Now, I'm going to try to explain this to you, set this up. We were familiar with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had all these countries that were under their domination. They were called satellite countries. The Xicano Empire was the same way. Now, in 37 BC was the birth of the Roman Empire. And in the Roman Empire, which came out of Rome, which is in Italy, they had all these different territories that surrounded them that they had conquered. These territories were made up of kingdoms. Territories that were ruled by kings. Every so many hundred miles there was a king, and then there was another king, and then there was another king, and there was another king. And you gave your loyalty to that king, and that royal family. Well, the Romans came, and they wiped them out. They conquered them militarily, and they started formulating territories, and they called them provinces. For example, France was one of their provinces. Spain was one of their provinces. Portugal was one of their provinces. Romania, and so forth. This was the Roman Empire. These people were speakers of Latino, or Latino. Now, Spain, which was called HISPANIC, and that's interesting, Rome gave this territory that they conquered and carved out the name Hispanic. When they finally liberated themselves from Rome, they called themselves Hispanic or Hispanic. The languages that they spoke were referred to as Romance languages, languages of Rome. Now, France attempted to speak Latin, and it came out a different dialect. The Spanish, as we know today, attempted to speak Latin, and it came out with a different dialect. If you speak a different language and you try to say the same thing with different muscles that have been developed, you get a different dialect. So they laughed at the way they spoke. The Spanish spoke Latin, the French spoke Latin, and so forth. So these different dialects became distinct languages, and they were referred to as Romance languages. But in Rome, they called it Vulgus Latin. Vulgus means common people. Now, what word comes from vulgus? Vulgar, dirty, filthy, smelly. Those people are trying to speak our language. They say the same thing about Xicano. Text me. So the problem with the word Latino is a couple things. One, you don't have a land base. What are you talking about? You're talking about Romania? You're talking about Italy? You're talking about France? You're talking about Spain? No. Latin America. Oh, you're talking about Latin America. Okay. Argentina? Talking about what? Peru? Mexico? What are you talking about? Where's the land base? Where's your home? What race are you? It doesn't say about race. What's wrong with Latino or Latin America? I'll tell you what's wrong with it. Number one, it excludes non-Latino speaking Indians. Because Spanish is Latin, the Latin language. Number one, it excludes non-Latino speaking Indians. Your own brothers are being excluded. Number two, it excludes the Indians of the United States and Canada. Three, it includes California Mission Indians and Pueblo Indians. They speak Spanish, well, it's dying away now. The Mission Indians of California and the Pueblo Indians of Mexico, they speak Spanish. They all have Spanish surnames. They all practice, celebrate same day. Every day they got a thing to celebrate. They're all Catholics. Mestizos, if you want to call them that. Okay? Don't tell them they're Latinos, man. They're Indios. You do not want to be called Latinos. So it incorporates people that don't want to be incorporated. Or it includes white people. Now, I was watching ESPN and they were interviewing Freddie Pacheco. Freddie Pacheco is a white man born. Now, Freddie Pacheco's mom and dad were born in Hispanic. Freddie Pacheco said, there is no discrimination in this country. The problem with the Spanish-speaking people is that they can't speak English. If they learn how to speak English, they wouldn't have no problem. They need to learn to speak the language. That's their problem. Now, here's a white man speaking for Indian people. But when you say Latino or Hispanic, you open that door. So what you have to do is you have to find an identity that's going to embrace all your Indian brothers, and at the same time, find an identity that's going to tighten up and localize who you are and what you are and what you're trying to achieve. Now, the word Hispanic, very simple. Of Spain. Y'all don't look like you came from Spain? Okay. In addition to that, you wash your hands in the blood of the conquistadores, murderers, genocidal people, and they have documented it themselves. Bloodthirsty serial killers, genocidal people. When you say I'm Hispanic, you were not the conquistador. You were the Indian. You were the victim. You are washing yourself in the blood of these people. Because they left a lot of blood throughout the United States, Mexico, Central America, South America. There was an article that I picked up from Todd in one of their study groups. It's called The Political Destruction of the Hispanics. The creation of the Hispanic minority. Hispanics were invented by the Federal Office of Management and Budget circa 1970. The label refers to quote, all persons of Mexican, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Central, or South American, or other Spanish culture or origin, regardless of race. I watched when he was showing, and I noticed in the daytime, I see all these white people speaking Spanish. All these beautiful, beautiful, blonde, blue-eyed men and women. And then as it starts to get dark, the dark people start coming out. By 5 o'clock, and the people come out. Okay? 9 or 10 o'clock, you got the angels out. Take it away. Okay? Now, I heard Russell Means talk, and he said the same thing about Native Americans. It was a name that was invented by the United States government. And it incorporates people that don't look Indian, they don't think Indian. It just makes it easier for the white man. He uses it uniform and simplify so he can better deal with you. Now, I was here a few years ago, and I talked a little bit about something that had to do with that. And this person said, yeah, but when we say Hispanic, man, we involve more people and it gives them more power. You want more people? You want more power? say Indian. You got a billion people right there. You say Indian. Not only that, you got your roots in the land. But when you say Latino, Latino where? Romania, Hispania, Italy, black, white, brown, what? What are you talking about? Now, I'm going to talk about Xicano tonight. Now, what is Xicano do? There are two things. It reveals and embraces our Indian ancestors. We are detribalized Indians. We have been removed from our indigenous nations systematically over the centuries. So we are Indians. No less, no more than enrolled Indians. Two, it gives us a land base. We are indigenous to the Southwest, and I intend to show that tonight. The Xicano was born in the Southwest, was not born anyplace else. This is our homeland. I don't care if you're born here or here. The Xicano was born in the Southwest, and that is 1540. If you come to my house, you're going to behave yourself. Okay? I sit down, I surf through the channels, I put my feet on the end table, I stick my finger in my nose, I do whatever I want because I'm home. You're not, you're a visitor. Okay? If I go to your house, the same thing. Now, the white man has convinced us that we're visitors, that we came from someplace else. Okay? And we act like we're visitors. But you know what? This is our house. His ass needs to get tight. We need to put him in order. But we don't have that attitude. We don't have that attitude because we are confused. We have a loud terminology created by him, as Danielle was saying the other night, created by him to make it simple for him to confuse us. We got to get over that. We've got to get over that. I want to read something real quick. Paragraph. I know DNA and genes took a blow with the O.J. Simpson trial, but this article, written several years ago, called Indian History in Genes. It says, listen to this, I'm paraphrasing. It says, nearly all American Indians are descendants of a single small band of pioneers who walked across what's now the Bering Strait from Asia, 15 to 30,000 years ago, a genetic indicator said Thursday. All right? All the pioneers, until we're immigrants. They like calling us immigrants. See, you got your immigrants too. You just got here first. That's important to them. They can't prove it. The Bering Strait is nonsense. The guy's name is Bering. It's 35-mile gap between the two landmasses. They look at it. That's how they got there. It froze and they walked over. And they kept beating it into us and beating it into us and beating it to us. And the theory became law. If you keep telling somebody enough, it becomes law. And that's what it is today. It's law. And they can't prove it. And most scientists say it's ridiculous. But it's law. Oh, we came over from Asia. Okay? And this guy here calls pioneers. Right? So let's look up a scientific definition of what a pioneer is. Now, he's also saying we're all the same. Right? I mean, right now he says, earlier he was saying we're different. You guys are Hispanic. You guys are Indian. You're different. You're not different. You got nothing in common. Okay, he's saying we're the same. Now, let's look up pioneer, because that's what he said we are. Pioneer. A person who settled in a part of the country that has not been occupied before except by primitive tribes. Okay, so this is Thorndike and Barnhart. Are we pioneers? Aren't we? Are we immigrants? Aren't we? No matter what, man, we can't get it right. It keeps taking away our land base. Columbus discovered America. That is totally ridiculous. 1992, President Reagan said that those three ships that came across were ships of liberty and democracy. Spain was a monarch. They had a king and queen practicing the Inquisition, governed by the Pope. That's not democracy. That's not freedom. They keep shoving these things down our throats. Now we need to start thinking for ourselves. And we need to start writing our history. And not the way will say, well, you guys are reconstructing history. No. We're revealing history. Columbus did discover America. That's a reconstruction. That's a reconstruction. Now, I want to pass these out here. Give me a chance. Okay, I want to just go through real quick. So, and I want you to refer to the maps when you find a need to. Sometimes I'll direct you to it, but if you need some help, go to it yourself. The first page is the colony of New Spain. As soon as the New World was discovered, the European nations got together, and they call it international conference. The European nations got together, and they started talking about, we found this new land, now we got to establish a rule of conquest and discovery. So they decided that this is what we're going to do. If we go to the New World, this is how we're going to map out territories that don't belong to us and so forth. And these are the obligations and prerequisites that we need to fulfill. All right. 1541, colony of Spain is mapped out. The conquistadores drive through the desert, and they see some stones, and they make a pile, and they say, in the name of the King and Queen of Spain and Almighty God, this land is ours. And they go a few hundred yards or a few hundred miles, and they do the same thing. They go all the way around, and they claim this land. And this is what they carved out approximately in 1541, the colony of New Spain. The next page is the Mexica Empire. The Mexica Empire, that dark area, consisted of approximately 39 what they call city-states. Actually, it was more like satellite countries. They were under the control of Mexico Tenochtitlan. These Mexicas here were called Tenochas. Tenochtitlan, they call them Tenochas. They were the Mexica that governed the Mexica Empire. For the most part, these nations, these other Indian nations, were autonomous, except they did have to pay tribute in terms of food, sometimes service in the military, young men, and sometimes, according to historians and the guy that was saying that the whole idea of giving hearts and sacrifice and all that is untrue. I don't know. That's not something I want to deal with right now. But that was one of the parts of tribute, paying tribute. And I think that's important to know. Then there's an overview of the word, or evolution of the word Xicano. Just take a look at it for a while, and look at that smooth flow. Mexicli, Mechi, Mexica, Mexico, not Mexico, Mexico, Mexicuaro, Mexicano, Xicano, Xicano. We have a mutation there with the CH. We'll get into that later. That's what I'm going to work for tonight. But you see, I have special emphasis for the letter X. It's critically important. We'll talk about that. Then the next page, the map is Indian nations. Now, these are the most names I could come up with. I was talking before I was talking to you about Diana has some Indian maps in the library that are much more detailed. So if you get a chance, go to the library and get some of these maps. There's a lot of Indian nations there. You ask if Xicano what kind of Indian you are, man, I'm Aztec. That was the one nation. That was the one tribe. Could have been anything. Could have been a combination of things. Why is he Aztec? Well, part of that is you got to be an Indian, might as well win famous. Okay, or that's the easiest one, because we cannot, for the most part, backtrack and find our tribal roots, because we have been tribalized, not de-Indianized, tribalized. There's a difference there. Okay, I'll tell you what Chichimeca is. Mesoamerican is a word created by anthropologists. Meso means half or middle. Middle America. But actually, it involves mostly sedentary nations. Now, the next map, ethnographic map of Mexico, lists about 51 Indian nations, of which I do not see the Aztecs. Rather, I see the Nahua and the Aztecs in brackets. Brackets. Anyway, the Azteca actually is Nahua because they spoke the Nahua language. Actually, they were Mexica. But even though there were many more Indian nations there, and this map is about 40, 50 years old, I tell you guys, I was doing some research. I went all over the place. I was reading everything, anything. And I thought this was a very good map because the basic point is show that there was more so-called Aztecs in Mexico. And many of the tribes are on both sides of the border. Next map is a map which thanks so much, appreciate it. It says Indian cultural area showing one system of categorizing Indian peoples by culture and geography. Now look at the Southwest. It goes way north of the Mexican border and way south of the Mexican border. This Southwest geographical area is a desert. What is a desert? A desert is an area that receives 10 inches or less of rain. So you got a friend 100 miles away and they get 11 inches of rain, they're not in the desert. They are. You can get up to 120, 130 degrees. But the point I'm trying to make is that this Southwest, and the fact that it is a desert, dictates the lifestyle of the people. It dictates the movement of the people, the mentality of the people, the limitations of the people, and so forth. Now the next map, it says Chichimeca homeland. As I said later on, I'll define Chichimeca, but it says desert culture. Now they have 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 deserts there. Actually, it's all the same desert. Modern man categorizes everything, and he does it for the purpose of an advantage, convenience, profit, or whatever. And it's to his advantage to classify these deserts accordingly. You got the Sonoran Desert, the Chihuahua Desert, the Mojave Desert, the Great Basin Desert, and sometimes they even include the Painted Desert. Now, that doesn't mean that the rest of the areas are not desert. Like I said, it might be an inch difference in rain. It might still be hot, it might still be dry, or whatever. Desert, desert. I don't care how the science classifies it. But all this area is desert, Southwest. Now, there's a line there, a very dark line that runs from Veracruz west to Tepic. That's an imaginary line that was created by the Spaniards to separate the two types of Indians. So they were dealing with two types of Indians. Chichimecas, or nomadic Indians, and south of them were sedentary Indians. Next map, the language map, is Uto-Aztecan language tribes. Now, Uto-Aztecan means of the same family. It's from the same family. The family is Uto-Aztecan. Now, family means that at some point in time, all these languages originated from the very same source. They're cognate. Now, you look at all over Mexico, the Nahuatl, Huichol, Tepehuan, Cora, Tarahumara, Zacateca, Sonora, and then you move up, you see the Pima, the Hopi, the Paiute, the Comanche. Now, the Comanche, remember the Chichimeca, the Mexica, so the Comanche were actually the Comantica. Now you go up to the Bannock, the Paiute, the Mono, the Panamint. They all speak a language that is very similar and has a common ancestor. If you take somebody from Mexico City who speaks Nahuatl and you take them up to northern Nevada or Idaho, for example, with a Bannock, according to linguists, they could communicate in their language. So the theory is that, according to linguists, and very credible theory, is that the majority of Chichimeca invaders that went down into Mesoamerica and conquered these advanced societies came as far away as Oregon and even Canada. You heard of Chief Seattle? Doesn't that sound like Nahuatl, Seattle, Mezquiado, Saguaro? All these names are Xicano, all the same family. Okay, and the last map is sort of like an aerial view of language and how it spread or was spread at the time of the arrival of the white man. So you may or may not be able to use them. I think you will. So take it upon yourself when to use those. Okay. Now it may seem like I'm going kind of slow, but if we miss something, it's going to be hard to catch up. So I'm going to try to walk you through what I'm trying to say. I'm going to talk about the Anglos first, even though Spanish invaded Mexico and Central and South America first. The Anglos came, landed on the East Coast, and started working their way west, and the name of Manifest Death began to systematically exterminate the indigenous people. Exterminate. Genocide. They wanted the land themselves. They wanted to work the land themselves. Now, the Spaniards, their brothers, did not want to work the land because they were above working the land. They were conquistadores. They did not come here to work the land. So what they wanted to do was to conquer the people and have the people work the land for them and extract the riches of the land for their benefit. And that's a relationship that is extremely important. In 1519, Cortez invades so-called Mexico. Now, when the Spaniards came, they practiced what I call the 4 C's. They conquered, they congregated, they converted, and they controlled. Conquered, obviously, is militarily. Now, they practiced genocide too, but it was more selective. They only took it to the point to where they could get the Indian population under control. That doesn't make them nicer, but they weren't. Congregate. We talk about reservations in the United States. In Mexico, they call them pueblos. They were reservations. For example, the town of Zacatecas. There was no town at one time until they discovered silver in the mountains. So they congregated the Indians that they had conquered and built a pueblo and called it Zacatecas, after the Zacateca Indians. Now, in this pueblo, you were forced to live there. You could not leave there. It was against the law to leave there. It was against the law to own a horse, to own a weapon. If you attempted to leave, you were murdered. If you did not go to church, you could have been burned. You were under control. You were congregated. So I talked to a guy who worked in the gas station, and he didn't like black people. Always had something negative to say about black people. And I confronted him one day. I said, man, what is it with you? What is it about black people that bothers you? I said, we're in the same boat. He said, yeah, man, but we got a country and we were never slaves. I said, no. You got that wrong. We were slaves. No, man, we were never slaves. So I dropped it right there because it didn't make no sense to talk to me anymore. We were slaves. We were enslaved. Now, I'm sure you've seen a bullfight. When the Spaniards first came to the New World, they fought the bull on a horse. The Indian was not permitted to have a horse. He fought the bull on the ground. Guess how they fight the bull today? On the ground. They got that from the Indians. Number 3 is convert or Christianize. That says a lot. in itself. And at this point, I'll leave it there right now. Number 4 was control. That just simply means to enslave. Now, today, all the land is taken. There's no more manifest destiny in terms of land. The new manifest destiny is the mind. If you can win that mind, you can control that person because that person has energy. That person can produce for you. So these people, these Spaniards, controlled the Indian population. And they made them free labor. They were nothing but labor. Now, to convert and control, you must be able to communicate. When the Spaniards came over here, let's call it Mexico, they found that there were several hundred languages spoken by these Indians. It would be an impossible task to learn several hundred languages. And contrary to what you might think, they didn't want to teach them Spanish. So they decided upon 4 languages. Nahuatl, AZTEC, HISPANIC, Xicano. Of those 4 languages, Nahuatl was the most dominant. And the reason why it was most dominant, we go back to the Mexica Empire, where they had the 39 so-called city-states. The lingua franca, or the language of business, the language of education, government, and so forth, was Nahuatl. Now, all these different nations had their own languages, but in addition to that, they spoke Nahuatl. So they were bilingual. For example, the Totonac, they spoke Totonac, and they spoke Nahuatl. For those of us who think we're Hispanic, like I said, Indians were not permitted or encouraged to speak Spanish. The Spaniards promoted and advocated a distinct Indian identity, both linguistically and religiously. In the name of Christianity, it was understood, even encouraged, to retain one's Mexican Indian identity. I'm quoting this from a documented source, and I think it's Spiritual Conquest of Mexico, Richard Ricardo. And I continue. They would not countenance any attempt to Hispanicize, or Europeanize the natives. It was held that for the Mexican to become a true Christian, he had to break entirely with his past, except, and this is an important fact, in his language, because it was clearly understood that to become a true Christian, he did not have to become a Spaniard, and that it was perfectly allowable, and even recommended, that he remain a Mexican. Now, I thought for the longest time that the Mexican, or the Mexicano, was born in 1821 with the country of Mexico. It was not, or either was not. They were. The Mexicano was born before that by the Spaniards as a distinct identity separate from the Spaniards, a controlled population and enslaved population. From the moment, and I'm quoting, it was established that they were not seeking to Hispanicize the Indians, and that the task of civilizing them was to be done completely and solely in the native languages. Books had to be put in the hands of all religions to allow them to study the language of the congregation or to perfect themselves in it, to help them to teach the Christian doctrine, make known the Holy Scriptures, and administer the sacraments, particularly the sacrament of penitence. Now, to do this, to communicate with the Indians, and like I said, Nahuatl was stressed. The Indians did not have a written alphabet like the Roman alphabet, so the Spaniards implemented the Roman alphabet using Spanish sounds like A, B, C, and so forth. I want to read something. This is critically important because this letter here plays a big role in our confusion and in the camouflage of our ancestry and our true identity. Michael D. Cole in Mexico commented on the role of the Roman alphabet for the Nahuatl language, its similarities and slight differences. Quote, a final matter must be touched upon in the pronunciation of the very formidable looking words and names of ancient Mexico. The matter is relatively quite simple, since they were transcribed in Roman letters in terms of the language spoken by the conquistadores of the 16th century. The language spoken by the conquistadores of the 16th century. There's an archaic Spanish and there's a modern Spanish. Right now we're talking about archaic Spanish. Those vowels and consonants are generally pronounced as they would be in modern Spanish, with these exceptions. In other words, archaic Spanish and modern Spanish is pretty much the same, with this exception, and this is in the 15th century. S has its sound of the English SH as it once had in Spanish. That's why when I was reading out Mexicli, Mechi, because if you didn't know that, you say Mexicli, Mexi, Mexica, Mexico, Mexicuaro, and so forth. But in the 16th century, and they were mimicking Indian words and sounds with Spanish, it was pronounced sh. Okay, why don't you take a look at the overview of the evolution of the word Xicano. You see the repetition of the letter X throughout. Okay, that's one thing I want to point out. Number two is the mutation or the absence of the letter X in the word Xicano. I want to read something out of the book for you. I got it from Diccionario de AZTEC. I got it from Francisco Lopez. Did you get that in Mexico?
No, man, I got it in the States.
Okay. I was hoping it's something exotic, man, like, in the jungle. You got to be down the street.
Busted into a pyramid, but got it.
It's called Diccionario de AZTEC. Now, it talks about each letter and how it's pronounced as it pertains to Nahuatl sound values. Okay, number 17 talks about X, and I'm quoting. It is pronounced like the French CH. It is pronounced like the French CH, or like the English SH. But you got to remember that Spanish and French come from the same source. So if anything, it's a CH sound. And listen to this. In most of the Mexican turned Castilian words, the X is no longer used. It has been substituted at the beginning of the diction with J or with F. For example, Xalapa, X-A-L-A-P-A, Alapa. Xoconochco, Xoconochco, and then it's spelled a new way, Soconusco. An interesting one is Jalisco, Xalixco. Today it's pronounced Jalisco. So you see the camouflage. You see the cognitive, but at the same time you see the camouflage. Now, I want to draw attention to somebody that I call it a mutation, and I talk about it in the book, like, what happened that all of a sudden they stopped pronouncing the SH or CH sound, or they discontinued using the letter X. Even when they used the letter X, they didn't have the sound, or the CH or SH sound. The other day I was talking to Francisco. Where you at, Francisco? Could you come up, please, and tell us, or stand up and tell us what you found out when you were a student here at MSU?
The word Mexico was written with the Okay. Yeah. Let's look it up. And basically, the letter X was prohibited to use Hispanic or Mexicano, the word Mexico spelled with a J. And I don't have the years. I meant to look it up. It was meeting there. But, it changed, of course, through time. The letter J was used, WX.
And that's the key word of prohibited. That's the mutation. That's why all of a sudden things started changing. Go ahead. Why was this prohibited? I think what happened was that, I can't answer that right now. I think what happened though, probably, was that there was an attempt to detach the richer people, because you had a caste system, first of all. You had 53 classifications. You had a Spanish caste system, which was worse than South Africa. So there was an attempt on the part, and a successful attempt on the part of the richer people, into that Razon, or people in control, white people, to distance themselves from Indians and anything that was Indian. Somebody was telling me that when they were working on the thing in Mexico, the trade thing, that when they took the camera people around the United States, they purposely avoided people with dark skin. They kept going to people that were well dressed and white and so forth. And that's what I was saying earlier about when he was young. There's an obvious separation and distinction. And started centuries ago. And I think that's what happened. Now, another thing, I can't answer that, but I think that's what happened. Maybe we need to find out if we can. That would really be interesting if you could find that document. That would be very powerful. Now, you notice that the word Aztec is not here. Where's the word Aztec? Well, 300 years after the conquest of the Mexica, the word Aztec is introduced by a German. In other words, these people did not call themselves Aztec. Now that's another thing that camouflages and confuses our identity. Now right here we got a smooth flow. You put Aztec in there and throw everything out of whack. It's a European word. It was something that was introduced. It was an attempt to say Aslan, or actually Aztlan, that meant Aztec. Okay, it's a catch-all phrase. It's just like Hispanic. That's thrown together. Hispanic. Okay, Native Americans. 1971, the federal government says Native Americans, throw them all together. That is for the white man to uniform and simplify, to make things easier for him. Period. Just make things easier for us. In approximately 1168, a small nation by the name of Chichimeca left probably what is north of Mexico. Could be within what is Mexico today. It could be in the southwest. I think somebody was talking about Aslan. This fellow over here. That's not important where they came from, because we're talking about the name. That's another issue. But anyway, these people call themselves Chichimeca. Now, what does Chichimeca mean? Some people say it means people of the dog. Some people say it means barbarian. Other authorities say they don't know. And then you have some authorities who say Chichimeca means people of the eagle. Neshifli was their god. Neshifli was represented by the eagle. The eagle symbolized the sheep, who symbolized the sun. Neshifli was the sun god, the war god, symbolized the eagle. Another name that was used was Huitzilopochtli, which means hummingbird god. And yet another name in Nahuatl is Huapli. And that's why I surmise that the TLI, I don't know anything about Nahuatl. I have trouble with Spanish. Okay? But you got Neshifli, a guy. You got Huitzilopochtli, a guy. And you got Swahili, Eagle God, Eagle War God. They all, and then this, and I figure this means reverence or godlike. Then she's they're God. God is the teaching master. I've heard and I've read that Guatemala actually was supposed to be pronounced Guatemala, coming from Guatemala. What's interesting is that Meshitli, Huitzilopochtli, and Huachtli all come together in what's called Huateca. Huateca is when a soldier of the Mexica loses his life on the sacrificial stone or loses it in battle. He becomes what's called a Huateca. And what that means is that word again is that he becomes a companion to the sun. He will rise and sit with the sun for 4 years, and that's a sacred number. 4. Every day for 4 years. Remember the sun, the sheeply, companion to the eagle. Now, after 4 years, he becomes a hummingbird to live forever and ever. The hummingbird is Huitzilopochtli apart. So you see the three gods come together. Now the Chichimeca were governed by what was called a theocracy, or government by God. And they were governed by a council of 4. You had to be a high priest if you were among the council of 4. Now, one of their leaders, or their main leader, was called Mechi. It is pretty obvious that Mechi was paying tribute to his God, the sheep. Christians is what? Followers of Christ, Christ-like, same thing. There was a high priest in Nayarit centuries ago. His name was Onati, and his God was Onati. Another name for the sun god. You heard of Quetzalcoatl. Quetzalcoatl was a religion and a god, but if you practice that religion, once you became a high priest, you became a Quetzalcoatl. You took on that name, Quetzalcoatl. That's why Mexican history and Southwestern history becomes very confusing, because there's times when you can't tell the difference, whether you're talking about a god or the man god. In Tula at one time, they had 9 Quetzalcoatl. They took on the name of their god. Montezuma. We know Montezuma I, Montezuma II of the Mexica Empire, once they settled in Mexica to North Carolina. Montezuma was a god that was worshipped by the Papago Indians and some Pueblo Indians as well. And at the time, I thought that they were actually worshiping the monarch, but they weren't. What it seems like is that the monarchs probably got their name to show their appreciation and worship for the god Montezuma. So in the book, I go into more detail, and I pretty much feel comfortable saying that she had named himself after his god. Now, in Chica, the Council of 4 appeared before the people and said, "We have received a sign from Mexica." Mexica said, "We must change our name to Mexica to indicate that we are followers of Mexico." I lost anybody? Okay. Now, they received a vision. And that vision is of an eagle on a cactus. And I understand the initial vision did not concern things. But they were to leave their homeland and to head south and to seek that vision. 100 years later, so it's not the same people, 100 years later, several generations later, They finally find that vision. The first thing I came across in my readings was Meshitli was the Nahuatl name for a war god, and a very likely source of the name Mexico. And that's simple. I got that all down. But then I came across contradicting beliefs, and I won't go into that. It's in the book. Okay. Because I don't agree with those. I feel comfortable saying, or I'll read that. Michael D. Cole and Mexico wrote, we next see the Aztecs following the hand to mouth existence in the marshes of the Great Lakes. Oh, they wandered, loved by none, until they reached some swampy, unoccupied land, covered by rushes near the western shore. It was claimed that their tribal prophecy to build a city where an eagle was sitting on a cactus, holding a snake in its mouth, was fulfilled. By 1344 or 1345, the tribe was split in two. One group under the chief Tenoch, founding the southern capital, Tenochtitlan. Now, in Francisco's book that he provided, Diccionario de Aztecismo, it has the following grammatical breakdown of the words Mexico, Tenochtitlan, which is really fascinating. And I say that Tenochtitlan was named in honor of Mexico's founder, Tenoch. It reads, when Titlan goes with person name, it means under, determined in epoch. Mexico Tenochtitlan means Mexico founded under the orders or in the reign of Tenoch. Following this example, some hybrids of modern towns have been formed among us, like Minatitlan in honor of General Mina, Barragan Titlan in honor of General Barragan, Polo Titlan in memory of Mr. Polo, who founded a town near San Juan del Rio. Another Nahuatl suffix implies Mexico related to Mexico. O, it means in, within. It is not postposition in the word ending in TL, with the exception of TLETL. Fire with which TLE, I know it's kind of confusing, but if you see it in writing, it's a lot simpler. TLETO in the fire is formed. It is joined to the noun, substituting the ending, TLI, substituting the ending, TLI, LIIN. For example, Mexicli, Mexico. A lot of sense. According to the grammatical description, it seems to me that Mexicli is in or within this designated area of Mexico. Or another way of saying it, Mexico is the home of Mexico. Or the home of the Mexica, the people of the eagle. You put it together and it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. The next word, Mexica, is plural. And I could have put Mexicuado or Mexicado, however it's pronounced, behind here. But I wanted to show Mexicuado's relationship to Xicano. Mexicuado is simply singular for Mexicano. Mexicano is the Spanish corruption or mispronunciation of Mexicuado, singular for Mexica. Xicano as a word, and as a people, as a concept, and as a program are entirely different. And I'll speak about that in a minute. I give a list under Mexicano of some Nahuatl words in their Spanish pronunciation and their English definition. For example, Macuaviro, the Spanish pronounce it Macana. That's a long way away. The definition is the Aztec war club. Cuauhtémoc, they pronounce it Cuauhtémoc. You know that was the last Aztec emperor. Huitzilopochtli, they pronounce it Huitzilopochtli, the Aztec war god. Aguacado, aguacate. That's an avocado. And I give a couple pages. One interesting one here is Huapango Credo. The Spanish pronunciation is Huapango. And we know what that is. Popular Mexican Chicano family. Now, Cortez zeroed in on the Mexica Empire in his conquest. And it was very easy if you resort to your Mexica Empire map. He was able to recruit the support of all the surrounding Indians. But another thing that made it easy is that these were fixed populations, they were sedentary people, they had fixed boundaries, they were much more predictable. So they actually, in comparison to the Chichimeca, they were a lot easier to fight. So he started with the Mexico area, the center of the empire, the Germans. Conquered there and took his time working his way across the empire, one at a time, using Indians to fight Indians. Now, as he conquered these Indians, he gave them all the names of Mexicanos. Now, this is before the birth of the country Mexico, which was in 1821. And it really simplified things by just calling them Mexicanos. After he conquered the Mexica Empire, the Spaniards, over the years, started moving northward. Now, you remember the map that had the imaginary line that separates the Chichimeca from the Mexica, the Mexicano. He began moving north. Okay, I told you that originally these people were called Chichimeca and they changed their name to Mexica. Now, the other Chichimeca became a generic term and represented all the people north of this border, this imaginary border. They were all called Chichimeca, and for derogatory reasons. Even the Mexica themselves called them Chichimeca. Xicano, which was one of the monarchs, told the historians to burn all evidence of their connection to the Chichimeca because they wanted royal blood. So they was into that stuff too. They wanted to show that they were connected with the AZTEC. They were connected with the royal family. So he said, burn the books, the pictographs, whatever shows our history. Rewrite it. Make us look pure. Make us look connected to the AZTEC. And you see that when Chicanos get here to this country and they look at their brothers, and when they come over, they have derogatory terminology. It's human nature. It's human nature. The Spaniards are right here. After the completion of the defeat of the Mexica Empire, the Spaniards divided New Spain into two types of Indians. Number one, the conquered and Christianized Indians who were labeled Mexicanos. Two, the unconquered Chichimeca, because they hispanized the term Chichimeca into Chichimeca, who were unchristianized and nomadic. As the Chichimeca became victims of the Four C's, they became classified as Mexicanos, an identity that was created and promoted by the Spaniards. That's why I call this Mexicano because it started moving north. Eventually it started catching up with the Chichimeca. And it started moving north toward the border we know today as the Southwest. It eventually got into the Southwest. San Antonio, Santa Fe, San Francisco, San Diego, San Luis Obispo, all these towns were nothing more than missions that apprehended Indians, conquered them, congregated them, converted them, and controlled them. They were Mexicanizing these Indians. At this point, because it was a century or two later, they were now teaching them Spanish. But they were producing, manufacturing Mexicans from the tribes that were in existence in the Southwest and in Mexico. So you could be a Mexicano or Mexicano in the Southwest and never came from Mexico. More than 3/4 of the Indian population of New Spain had been conquered, congregated, Christianized, and controlled after almost 300 years of continuous war between the Indians and the Spaniards. The Chichimeca and the southwestern United States, who escaped Spain's conquest, detribalization, and Mexicanization, have become today enrolled or so-called American Indians. Now, Chichimeca, when the Spanish came, Chichimeca, according to the Spanish historian. When the Anglos came and they wrote history, they didn't use the word Chichimeca. They used the word Indian. But it's the same people. The terminology is different. The Chichimecas got lost in history. They got buried in history. But they're the same people. The very same people. Now, these centuries and centuries of war between the Spaniards and the Chichimecas were called the Chichimeca Wars. You heard about the Yaquis. I talked about the Yaquis being exiled and so forth. The Yaquis never signed a peace treaty with the Mexican government. I think it was until 1950 or something like that. The Sete Indians never signed a treaty until, I think, 1978. The Tarahumara, probably quite a bit earlier. These people fought beyond the Apache. They fought beyond the Comanche. The same Indians, all Chichimecas. Yet, you're told in your history books that 500 crackers, okay, with 40 million Indians, naked Indians, okay? I mean, that's disgusting. I mean, that's terrible. That's degrading. And for years, I felt terrible. I said, man, we don't even know how to fight. That's a terrible history. You know what that does to you in terms of self-respect? But history is critically important. That's why this country spent $600 million on the quincentennial to tell you the damn lie that Columbus discovered America. And he does it every year on October 12th. He rubs it in your face. And he knows you hate it. Because it's important. The founding fathers. I remember that poem. I can't remember who wrote it, but I remember it's about the Xicano that's in class. He's got a white teacher. He's kind of old and off. He's mostly like in class. He's bored. He's not interested. And all of a sudden, he wakes up. He says, "Dare I ask for her to reiterate? Did she say George Washington was my father?" So I raise my hand and I say, if George Washington was my father, why wasn't he Xicano? And it makes sense. It makes sense. Russell Means he says, those people who wore wigs and tights and nylon and high heels and wigs are not our founding fathers. He said, they're transvestites. History is extremely important. It's important. It goes back to what I was saying about energy and identity. It's extremely important. Geronimo is your ancestor, the wonderful Geronimo. Pope, and I wear this in honor of Pope. Pope is your ancestor. Captain Jack, Chato, Nana, bad dudes. And so is Emiliano Zapata, the ancestor of the Indians, the so-called road Indians of the United States. They're all our ancestors. We can draw energy and pride from all these people because they're our Razas. But they've been taken away from us. And we play right into that. I could read about anybody that's indigenous West Hemisphere, and I draw pride and courage, enthusiasm, and interest, because I'm free, baby. I know my history. Now, Xicano, Xicano, I just give examples of all the words that start with an X. For example, Chicalanca, Chilonan, Chipe, Xochimilco, and Xochiquetal. And I talk about, it's not surprising that these words have an X. What's surprising is that they're still pronounced with an H. How did they survive? How do they continue to maintain the Indian tongue? Now, if you look at the Chicano vocabulary, the Spanish vocabulary, and you look at the origin of the words, you'll find that so much of those Spanish words are actually bastardized Indian words. And if Columbus and Cortez were here today, and they found out that 80% of the genes of Mexico are Indian, and that the food is primarily Indian, and that the religion is primarily Indian, even though it's called Catholic, and that the language is primarily Indian, they would have to ask themselves, well, who conquered who? We took their best shot. We stuffed them in. We still got some work to do, but somehow we consider ourselves a minority. Now, in the last section here, Xicano, I like to quote Gary McWilliams in his book, North Mexico. He says, the Spanish speakers have an identification with the Southwest which can never be broken. They are not interlopers or immigrants. He said we're not immigrants. But an indigenous people. As a consequence, they resent and will always resent any designation which implies a hyphenated relationship to their native environment, and particularly so when this designation is applied by Anglo-American interlopers and immigrants. Now, this book was written in 1949. A white man in 1949 said, they are the indigenous people. You, my brethren, are the foreigners. You are the Mohawks. Now that is a courageous man. That is a courageous man. Now, Richard Rodriguez says, to be Chicano was to take a stand. To be Chicano meant no compromise, no accommodation. To be Chicano was to say, we are not the foreigners. That's how powerful that word is. But you're making a statement. You have created your own identity, and now you can trace it. Now, in trying to discover whether a word is cognate or not, where its origin is, you don't necessarily look at the spelling. You listen to the sounds, and you listen to the definition. This is the case with the word Chicano. If you look at the word Chicano and Mexicano, you say, well, it's kind of a similarity, but Mexicano and this is Chicano. So you listen to it. Listen to the definition. And if you look at the history and you find out what X really stands for, hey, we got something. Chicano. Now, I'm not going to get into it. Buy the book, study it, it'll do you more justice. I do want to add one thing about the X, and I think I did mention this earlier, about Don Quixote. Did I say anything about Don Quixote? No. So, Don Quixote was written in the 16th century. Don Quixote, at the time, you know, is spelled Quixote. Well, in the 16th century, it was pronounced Don Quixote. Today, the French spell it Don Quixote. They didn't change, but the Spaniards did. and I give example after example of how words today, for example, chocolate was spelled Xocoatl. It went from an X word to a TH word. Now, and I conclude that Xicano is a flip word from Mexicano, and flip word simply means something that comes from a main word, for example, ads from advertising, font from font. If in fact Xicano is a flip word from Mexicano, that would make the word mexicli its root word. This would make los Chicanos people of the eagle as well. It is believed that the Mexica came from approximately 80-90 miles north of Yuma. In Yuma, Arizona, a Chicano was born who created the greatest music in the history of mankind. A little Indian dude, the most charismatic and daring and sincere man we have ever met. That's a Chavez. What's interesting is that Cuauhtemoc means descending eagle. Cuauhtemoc was the last emperor of the Mexican Empire. He was the descending eagle, the setting sun. And I say that this Chavez was the rising eagle and the rising sun. And he gave us birth, and he gave us an identity. And he gave us back Mexicli. And we need to get back to our roots. Very quickly, you can't discuss Chicano without discussing the Chicano people. And I'm going to go through this briefly. In 1846, let's imagine the Southwest. The Southwest is primarily two kinds of Indians. Mexicano, or detribalized Indians, who have been Mexicannized, and Chichimecas. There were hardly any languages. Hardly any. Gold hadn't been found, and an air conditioner then yet. You can laugh if you want, that's true. It wasn't until the 1940s, after the invention of the air conditioner and its refrigerator, that the white man started to come to the Southwest. And the only reason why he had whites at the other time, earlier, was because of the gold rush. It was mostly the Chicanos and Chichimecas. As a matter of fact, all the publications were in Spanish. There were no English-speaking newspapers. That's how dominant we were in the population. There were more Mexicanos than there were Indios. And he calls you Mojao. 1846, the United States declares war. By 1848, with the Treaty of Guadalupe, they cut Mexico in half. They cut Mexico in half. They separated Mexicano. Mexico accepts $15 million in addition to giving up the land. That's why the historians say they call us those who were sold. And they call us vendidos in Mexico sometimes. But we got sold. Now, the Treaty of Guadalupe said that this government are to respect the property rights, the political rights, the religious rights, and the language rights of the Mexicanos and the Indians or the Chichimecas. This country or the territory passed laws that directly contradict that treaty. So we are rejected by Mother Mexico. We are rejected by the Americans, the Native Americans. Give you an example. California Constitution of 1849. It's placed in these states. Section 1. Every white male citizen of the United States and every white male citizen of Mexico who shall have elected to become a citizen of the United States under the Treaty of Peace. That's Treaty of Guadalupe. It's changed and ratified at Querétaro on the 30th of May, 1848, at the age of 21, who shall have become a resident of the state 6 months next preceding the election. And it goes on. It's called the just for white folks. California became a state of the Union under this Constitution, and Texas was admitted earlier under a similar Constitution. The rest of the territory, ceded by Mexico in 1848, was divided into two territories, Utah and New Mexico. At the time, you didn't have Arizona. It was called New Mexico, with territorial government set up by this law in 1850. And it will be further enacted that every free white male inhabitant above the age of 21 years who shall have been a resident of said territory at the time of passage of this act shall be entitled to vote at the first election. That's a violation of that treaty. Our lands were stolen systematically. Talked to Reyes Lopez, you know, the Spanish struggle with Spanish land grant. The Pueblo Indians got ripped off. War was declared on the Indians, and they were eventually placed on reservations, those of them who lived. They became eventually enrolled Indians, and we became Mexicans. But it was that rejection by the Americans in Mother Mexico that created the need for a third identity. That contractual extraction and that racial separation that created a new birth of a new people, a Xicano. And in saying Xicano, we know where we came from, we know who our mother is, so we have a distinct identity. And what's beautiful about the letter X, and Todd and I were at the conference. Todd has seen me. We're at the conference in California, the National Metric Conference. And every time they wrote Xicano was Xicano. And the X said something. I am Indio. I am back. I am back to basics. I am proud. It is beautiful. Corky wrote a poem. Part of it says, and if you look over, I'm sure it is. He says, I shed tears of sorrow. I sorrow seeds of hate. I withdraw to the safety within the circle of my own people. That's what you do when people reject. That's what we're doing here. We come to comfort and support and energy and direction. It is necessitated by the way we are treated. So we have developed a third identity. And Xicano establishes that we are indigenous to the Southwest. We were born in the Southwest. That is our home. You call it anything you want. That's fine or whatever. But the fact is, maybe one day we'll have a name for it. We were born in the Southwest. We are indigenous. Thank you. Oh, any questions? I'm sorry. Yeah.
I would know why it's so hard on the so-called road.
No, I'm not hard. Actually, I was trying to point something out. Was that what I was trying to point out? And I had said it earlier that enrolled Indians are saying, "Hey, man, you guys are calling yourself Hispanic, Mexican, man, you call me everything. You call yourself everything but Indian." And I understand what they're saying. What's your problem? You guys are ashamed of what? I'm not hard on enrolled Indians. I'm using that terminology because even enrolled Indians and Chicanos who call themselves Hispanics have got to address the issue of Indians. I mean, I understand why, and I've been in for a long time. I've been to a lot of places on the reservation. I understand why you say, look, you guys aren't enrolled, and We don't want you to take out of our service. No, we don't have the same relationship with the government. We got the treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, but we are so far removed from it in holding this country accountable. Because we do have a treaty, but we don't have the same treaty rights. We don't have the same treaty relationship. I'm not hard on your little brothers. I'm hard on my people. Because they call themselves Hispanic and embarrass themselves. White man wouldn't even teach in Spanish. Committed genocide against us. Then invited to the Olympics in 1992, and they call themselves Hispanic. And won't let them on TV till it gets dark. I mean, who am I hard on? Anybody else?
So, the Xicano are from the Southwest, right?
No, not necessarily. It doesn't matter where they came from. Actually, my opinion, it's see, they have found, scientists have found, you talking about white folks. Scientists have found, the linguists have found, which is the most effective way to backdate actually is language. That's why I gave it a language map. And linguists have found that it is most likely that so-called mestizo came from the area of Arizona. You know, and that is so important because they can claim the Southwest based on the fact that the Mexica came from the Southwest, went down to Mexico, kicked the hell out of a bunch of people, got their ass whipped by some crackers, some strangers, came back as migrants, okay, got drunk in the bar and said, hey, this is ours, baby. This is where the AZTEC came from. It's total nonsense. But the good part of that is that if we want the Southwest, we can take it. We got the numbers. We got the numbers. You go to the Southwest, 95% of the people working outside are Indians, Chicanos, and Mexicans. All right? But we ain't got the guts to build a nation. Because we can't cooperate, we can't coexist. I'm sorry, but I have to promise. We have demonstrated that time and time again. It doesn't matter where they came. The white man was the last person here. He runs the program. It don't matter who came here first. Who got the biggest hammer? We ain't got no hammer, man. We ain't got no hammer at all. They had 187 man Chicanos for jumping on Chicanos and jumping on Mexicans. And you know, the white man can't send no Mexicans back to Mexico. I ain't gonna work in the field. I'm spoiled there. White folks ain't gonna work there.
Do it.
You know what? They ain't gonna send nobody back there. They just said that to get it off. Because they know white folks hate Mexicans. White politicians use their people. Look at King Richmond guys playing code words and words like democracy and don't burn the American flag and stuff like that. They don't care about nobody. Democrats fighting Republicans. They're not fighting for justice. They're fighting to see who can run the plantation. That's what time it is. We need to get real. What I'm saying is it don't matter where, who came from where. We got the numbers, we got the manpower, we got the savvy. What we got to do is start building a nation. I saw 1 million black people march on Washington. The most hated man in America said we're gonna march on Washington. There. Can you imagine what 1 million people do in 1 year? If they gave all the money to one source? That's powerful. And I saw one lady who speaks. I saw Miss Shabazz speak, who was married to Malcolm X, who was murdered supposedly by the movement. And she spoke, and you know what that said to me? That black people are so serious about coming together that they're prepared to overlook the difference. And she kind of like that. She kind of like that.
That's the problem.
It is the problem.
All the Indians need to get together, regardless of where they come from, in-road, D-road, whatever road, just get it together, because we have masses. They have us split up into the little pockets. The Native Americans are 1% of the place. The fastest growing population is Xicano.
Yeah, we can
If
go
they
back.
all got together.
You know, I said we got the numbers. You know, I remember in Rhodesia, which was named after a guy named Mr. Rhodes, from England. They were like 2% of the population white people. They ran the whole country. That's in South Africa. I mean, you got more numbers. They don't necessarily do anything. You got to have cooperation. You guys, I saw Todd. You know, Todd is. You know, I don't job nobody. Man. I don't ride shotgun. I I saw Todd turn this university upside down. Okay? With women. A few of them. Okay? But who benefits? Well, he got all this money, and the Chicanos who got the money don't even know what he did. They're going to come to the university and think they got here on their own merit, and then they ain't going to come to your meeting. You got to come together. It only takes a few. Opea did it. He did it. It only takes a few, but you got to come together and you got to stick together. It gives you a lot of power. It's nice that we got the numbers in the Southwest, but we got the numbers. We got, I quoted North of Mexico, Karen Williams, and he said that the Southwest is one of the greatest economic powers on earth. He said two things made that possible. He said Mexican workers and irrigation. But who do you think laid the pipe for that irrigation? Mexico. He said the best friend the Mexican got in the Southwest is the sheep. That's our friend. The sheep, we can deal with it. We can't deal with it. Oh yeah, this is looking at the
But there's some of us though that transplanted to the frozen wasteland. I can deal with the cold. I was speaking third person. Yeah. I can deal with the cold, but when I get in the heat, it's over.
It's a good question, man. But what we got to do is, like Malcolm X said, is that we got to. He said at the Bangdom Conference, the World Conference. He said everybody was non-white. We didn't have no missiles. We didn't have no atomic bombs. We didn't have no Green Berets. He said we had unity. We got to come together, and we got to scream at each other, and holler at each other, and argue with each other, and go out united. See, but we come here all clean and delicate and all that stuff. Man, we got to pull it out, man. We got to get ready to be real when we go out there. We can do it. We can do it. That's why they don't invite me to nothing downtown. But they know how.
America, man. United with,
Native Americans like things in Spanish. Right?
Okay, man. Okay.
Right?
Okay, in uniting with the indigenous people of this whole side of this earth, this hemisphere, man, what is your suggestion or opinion on terminology as far as a name and identity?
But I was talking about it earlier, that they had a conference and they decided upon the name Indian or Indian. We got to find something, even if it's a trust that was given to us, it is a common name. Let's get past the name, we got something common, we're all Indian. That shows we have a commonality. It's common with Indian. We're indigenous. Indian. It is very simple. But I don't have any illusions that we're going to come together as one great hemisphere. It's not going to happen. We need a philosophy. We need some kind of philosophy that we can all deal with. I need a philosophy where I don't even have to see it. Okay, I know what to do in certain situations. I got to say something about the fan in a minute. You ever hear it?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Whatever kind of band you belong to, First Nation, I think it's really cool that you have to First Nation says
Yeah, I saw that first in First Nation creation. Opea in 1681, Opea was Pueblo Indian, and they had all these different pueblos that were under the domination of Spanish. Opea secretly went into Cuba, inspired with several other so-called medicines. They had been beaten, cut, and degraded in front of their people because they were practicing their religion. They were called devil worshippers. So they secretly conspired against Spanish. And they came on a particular day when they were all going to come together. So he came up with this idea of now. He gave, there were like 50 runners, so they were all given these strings and they had like 49. And every morning at sunrise, they would turn time. And when they got to the last night, that's when they were to come down on the Spanish. So they would all do a kind of scheme. The Vendidos, they gave 69. You know? So they knew who they did look for it, so it was perfect. It was the most successful rebellion in history of Western Indians. And the Spaniards stayed out of Southwest for 12 years. And that's the only reason why Pueblo Indians today are not considered Chicano. That's exactly why, because of that successful rebellion.
There's a book that talks about that, and Apaxu's right, they kicked their ass. I mean, it was a complete reclaiming of everything. I mean, they did away with religion, the Catholic religion, they did away with everything. But, I mean, eventually, the economic forces, even the military forces, were just overwhelming. But there's a book called When Jesus Came, the Foremothers Went Away, and it talks about the Pueblo Indians and the whole experience in the Pope Rebellion. So it's a really good book. You should get it and read it.
I read guys like that, and I just feel energized. They're very dangerous. It's dangerous to run about these guys. I mean, this right here, that's dangerous. Culture invaded northward. Military invasion came southward. The soldiers, the warriors, were the teaching Mexico. They were hunters, they were gatherers. The Spanish did not fight them. They were great with whole land. They lived off the land. They were so mobile. They could find water and they knew territory. And they could, but they could beat up, man, because they all had houses. They could beat up the sedentary people in Middle America. They had fixed population. They were like, they go to grocery store. They couldn't live off the land. They had but they were easy to fight. When they got to the Chief America, they couldn't deal with it. They called that area Sierra Negra. Once you cross that line, you were on your own. They would go 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people at a time. That's why you got a problem. And they tell you that they defeated Mexico in 2 years. I believe that for 30 years of my life. And I said, every time I get out, I scream. No, it didn't happen that way. It didn't happen that way. Today, look at it. We're great fighters, man. We just fight for the wrong cause. We fight each other, and we go fight on the foreign soil. We spill blood just to have a job. We can't get that at home. That's the wrong reason. We're great boxers. We're little people. We're the most spiritual people on earth. Yeah. Sure. My man will check you out. I'll kill you, man. We'll wait for weather flag. Hey, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.
De un vil tratado así nació. Y le pusieron nombre Xicano porque al mirarlos así gritó. Yo soy Xicano, no tengo miedo. Porque soy fuerte de corazón, porque yo a nadie pido permiso, yo grito fuerte y con razón. Siempre luchando contra el destino, 50 estados atravesó. Establecido ya fuerte y grande, muchas semillas así sembró. Él es Xicano, no tiene miedo. Porque porque es muy fuerte de corazón. Pela en las guerras bajo bandera que le ha negado su protección. Montañas tumbó paredes, su piel de indio el sol quemó. Y aunque los golpes le llueven fuerte, él nunca dice aquí me doy. Yo soy chicano, no tengo miedo. Porque soy fuerte de corazón. Yo soy bilingüe, tengo a mi prieta y no presumo, soy querendón. Yo soy chicano, no tengo miedo. Porque soy fuerte de corazón. Yo soy bilingüe, tengo a mi prieta y no presumo, soy querendón.
Xicano Productions. Copyrighted 96. Xicano.